There's no such thing as a categorical reason. On this issue, the philosopher Russ Shafer-Landau disagrees. In a video debate hosted by the YouTube channel Majesty of Reason, Shafer-Landau presented an argument that aimed to show that categorical reasons exist. And in this video, I'll explain why his argument fails. This is going to take a bit of work. We're going to have to figure out what categorical reasons are and why they are thought to matter. Then we're going to have to piece together the argument. And finally, I'm going to show why the argument fails. You can find the argument here, and I'll include links. But here is what Shafer-Landau says, quote, I also believe that there are non-instrumental reasons. Here's an argument. I'll try to convince you. I've tried it on others. It hasn't always worked. Here's the argument that has convinced me, and that's the following. If you are blameworthy for a given action, then there is a reason not to do it. People are blameworthy for actions even though they've got no desire that would be satisfied or promoted by refraining from those actions. Therefore, those people have reason to refrain from those actions. Now, according to Shafer-Landau, those reasons to refrain from blameworthy actions must be categorical reasons. They can't be instrumental reasons, since instrumental reasons are grounded on desires. The second premise tells us that the agent has no desire that would be served by refraining from the blameworthy action, so the reasons to refrain must be categorical. Now, this was given in a YouTube debate without the possibility of making it precise, so I'm going to have to clean up the argument a little. But I'll explain each step I take to clean it up and why I take it. Now I'm going to need to define some terms, instrumental reasons and categorical reasons. Instrumental reasons are reasons that are grounded on desires. In the discussion where Shafer-Landau gave this argument, they used the example of a person taking an umbrella when they go outside during a rainstorm. The reason to take the umbrella is an instrumental reason. The agent doesn't want to get wet. To fulfill the agent's desire to stay dry, the agent takes an umbrella. Categorical reasons, in contrast, are reasons that aren't dependent on desires. Shafer-Landau tells us that there's a reason not to perform a blameworthy action. Now, this makes sense. It would be odd to say that something is wrong, but there's no reason not to do it. But those reasons are independent of desire, according to Shafer-Landau, so they must be categorical reasons. The first premise of the argument is this. If you are blameworthy for a given action, then there is a reason not to do it. The second premise, people are blameworthy for actions even though they've got no desires that would be satisfied or promoted by refraining from those actions. And this gives us the conclusion, therefore, those people have reasons to refrain from those actions. And as I mentioned above, those reasons to refrain from those actions must be categorical reasons, according to Shafer-Landau, since the agent has no desires that would be served by refraining. Before assessing this argument, I want to clean it up a bit to make sure that we can see exactly what it says. First, I'm going to change the informal you in the first premise to the name of some hypothetical agent that I'll simply call Agent 1. And this means I want to change the second part of the premise so that it specifies that the argument is concerned about whether there is a reason for Agent 1 to not perform the blameworthy action. Then, for consistency, I want to make sure that the second premise also refers to the same hypothetical, Agent 1, and the conclusion also has to be talking about the same hypothetical, Agent 1. And then the conclusion has to say that Agent 1 has no desire that would be satisfied by promoting or refraining from those blameworthy actions. Now, these changes don't change the argument. It simply makes the argument more precise. I want to make sure that I'm not creating some straw man that's based on some loose, informal use of language. But now I want to draw your attention to a shift in terminology that you can find in the original argument. The first premise uses the phrase, there is a reason for Agent 1 not to perform the blameworthy action. The conclusion uses the phrase, Agent 1 has a reason to refrain from blameworthy actions. These two phrases, there is a reason and has a reason, aren't consistent. These phrases have to be made consistent as well for the argument to be sound. So now we have a question. Should we change the phrase in the conclusion to match the phrase in the premise, or change the phrase in the premise to match the phrase in the conclusion? Well, we have two options, so let's try one at a time and see what happens. Spoiler alert, we're going to find out that neither of these two options works, and this is why I reject the argument. So the first option, we're going to try to change the conclusion to match the premise. Since the premise says there's a reason for Agent 1 not to perform the blameworthy action, I'm going to change the conclusion so that it also says that there is a reason for Agent 1 not to perform some blameworthy action. And now we need to take a closer look at this phrase, there is a reason. As luck would have it, this phrase is also ambiguous. There's two different things we could be saying when we say that there's a reason for Agent 1 to do something. One possible interpretation, well, it means that there's a reason that Agent 1 not perform the action. And this just means that there's a reason somewhere in the world. And it's a reason that takes Agent 1 not performing the action as its object. The second type of reason counts as a reason for Agent 1 not to perform the action. And this is to say that this reason for Agent 1 is a reason that has power and influence over Agent 1's actions. That there is dancing at the party might count as a reason for Ronnie to go to the party, but doesn't count as a reason for Bradley to go to the party, owing to the fact that Ronnie likes dancing and Bradley doesn't. Now we have a second choice to make. We've chosen to make the conclusion consistent with the premise. And now we have to choose the correct interpretation for both the premise and the conclusion. Once again, let's try these interpretations one at a time. Let's start with the interpretation that says that the phrase, there's a reason for Agent 1 not to perform the action, means that there's a reason that Agent 1 not perform the action. There's a reason not to perform the action out there somewhere. Under this interpretation, the first premise seems true. It would, in fact, be quite odd to say that an action is blameworthy, but that there's no reason not to perform that action. And the argument seems sound. The truth of the conclusion follows from the truth of the premises. However, the conclusion is far from surprising. Most importantly, the conclusion doesn't prove that categorical reasons exist. It says that there's a reason, somewhere, that the agent not perform the action. And if it's a blameworthy action, there are lots of reasons that the agent not perform the action. But they are not categorical reasons. They are the hypothetical reasons other people have. Reasons they have to condemn or criticize or blame people who perform actions of that type. Let me illustrate this with an example, drunk driving. To say that Agent 1 is blameworthy for drunk driving is to say that there are reasons that Agent 1 not to drive while drunk. These reasons don't depend on the agent's desires. They are the reasons other people have to condemn, criticize, punish, or blame people who drive while drunk. And those reasons are based on the fact that drunk drivers tend to put others at risk of death or injury or the destruction of their property that those others have instrumental reasons to prevent. I would wager almost everybody has reasons to avoid injury and death. Our reasons to avoid injury and death are reasons to manufacture reasons for others to not perform acts that tend to cause injury and death, actions like drunk driving. Our reasons that people not engage in drunk driving are reasons that people not engage in drunk driving. And they don't depend on what would satisfy or promote the desires of drunk drivers. So again, under this interpretation, the first premise is true. If Agent 1 is blameworthy for drunk driving, then there are reasons to blame, condemn, criticize, and perhaps even punish those who engage in drunk driving in similar circumstances. And Agent 1 can be blameworthy for drunk driving, even though Agent 1 has no desires that would be satisfied by refraining from drunk driving. And so we can make sense of this argument under this interpretation without inventing some type of categorical reasons. All we need are the instrumental reasons other people have to discourage people from performing acts of that type. The way that those who want to avoid and want to help those they care about avoid injuries and death caused by drunk drivers. So the first interpretation didn't support the existence of categorical reasons. Let's try the second interpretation. This interpretation says that there is a reason for Agent 1 not to engage in the action. If we go with this interpretation, the first premise says, if Agent 1 is blameworthy for a given action, then there is what counts as a reason for Agent 1 to not perform that blameworthy action. In our example of the wrongness of drunk driving, this interpretation, if true, tells us that for drunk driving to be blameworthy, there must be a reason that Agent 1 counts as a reason for me to not drive while drunk. And if this desire-independent reason for me doesn't exist, then his action isn't blameworthy, quite independent of the death and injury potentially imposed on others. Here I would argue that the first premise is false. It is, at best, question-begging. Nobody would accept the existence of these reasons for me that doesn't already accept categorical reasons. With the first premise being false, or at best question-begging, the argument fails to establish that categorical reasons exist. So we have our two interpretations. The first interpretation fails to establish the existence of categorical reasons, since it only requires the existence of the instrumental reasons others have to condemn, criticize, and blame. The second interpretation has a premise that I take to be false, but is at best question-begging, so neither interpretation establishes the existence of categorical reasons. We have another option to consider. We considered the option of changing the phrase in the conclusion to match the phrase in the first premise, and that option failed to establish the existence of categorical reasons. We still have the option of changing the phrase in the first premise to match the conclusion. With this option, the first premise now says if Agent 1 is blameworthy for a given action, then Agent 1 has a reason to refrain from that blameworthy action. Given the work that we've done above, we can dismiss this option very quickly. Saying that Agent 1 has a reason to refrain is the same as saying that there is a reason for Agent 1 that counts as a reason for me to refrain. The two premises say the same thing. So the fault of being either false or question-begging that applied to the earlier version applies to this version as well. And the argument fails to establish the existence of categorical reasons. So what do we get? Shafer-Landau's argument fails to establish the existence of categorical reasons. It only establishes the existence of hypothetical reasons to condemn, criticize, blame, or punish as a way of manufacturing reasons for others not to perform actions that could lead to death or injury or other forms of harm. This is not a surprising or even a controversial consequence. So why is drunk driving wrong? Well, it's wrong because it causes death and injury to others. Because it causes death and injury to others, others have reasons to motivate people to refrain from drunk driving. To do this, they use criticism, condemnation, blame, and punishment. These are hypothetical reasons, not categorical reasons, and there is no evidence for the existence of categorical reasons.